Hi guys, so for those of you that don't know, my name is Michael and I am the woodworker for MK Designs, and welcome to part 2 of the mobile miter station build. This has been a year-long project that I've been working on, trying to come up with plans and trying to make decisions. And if you missed the first video, there's a link to it down in the description below. And yeah, I'm very happy with this project. I'm really excited about it, and I'm looking forward to showing you how to do it. And once again, I do have plans available on my website, and the link for that will be down in the description. And today I think we're going to start working on the drawers and trying to get the bottom finished. So let's get to it. So this is where we left off, and as you can see, we've got the casters on and the frame is pretty much complete. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the pieces for my little bars that I'm going to use to store my clamps on the side ready to go. I decided to use a hardwood for this because the clamps can get heavy, and I was afraid that the plywood just wouldn't be quite strong enough. So this is some scrap quarter-sawn white oak that I had left over from my nightstand build, and I'm going to get it jointed down and planed down, and then I will glue it together and we'll cut it after the glue sets. So what I've done is I've milled it down to a 1/2 inch thickness, and then I'm going to laminate these two pieces together because I wanted to get two 1 inch by 1 inch bars out of this. And it was at this point that I realized I needed to get a new brayer. So I've ordered 2 new ones, and they should be here by the time I get finished with all this. So once I have the glue spread out the way I want it, then I will take my clamps and clamp it up and let it sit to dry. And while the glue is drying, I'm going to measure for the side cabinets where the bars are going to go to hold the clamps. I'm going to take 2 measurements, one at the top and one at the bottom, just to make sure everything's even and I can make adjustments as necessary from there. So the way I'm going to make the side cabinets is I'm just going to use some of the scrap from the plywood from the rest of it that I've been making, and I'm going to cut 4 sides and then a back, and I'm going to pocket hole screw the whole thing together, and we'll go through that process. Right here I am just cutting the pieces for the sides and the tops to make them square on one edge so that I can get an accurate measurement and cut from there. So needless to say, the next step after getting them cut to length is to rip them down to width. So once I have the sides and top and bottom cut to size and ready to go, I need to figure out what I need to cut the backs to. And so I'm going to do a dry fit here and measure it and then cut the backs. And as I said, I'm going to join them with pocket holes. So first step is I'm going to have to drill the pocket holes. Okay, so now it's time for assembly. So I'm going to start by attaching the sides to the top and bottom, and I'm going to get everything lined up and square, and I'm going to use a parallel clamp to help hold everything in place, and then I'll drive the pocket screws. Once I have those assembled, then I can attach the back. So I get the back lined up and I use a parallel clamp to hold it in place, basically squeezing in the center, and that will actually hold it in place, and then I'll drive the pocket holes. Now the reason there's 2 pocket holes on those 2 sides is because I screwed up my measurements and had to go back and recut it, and this was after I'd already drilled the first pocket holes. So again, measure twice, 3, 4, 12 times, cut once. Once those are ready to go, then my board that I glued up for my bars is ready to go. So I'm going to get one side cleaned up so I can get some clean cuts out of it, and I'm going to cut my 1 inch by 1 inch bars. So the reason the shelf measurements are not in the plans is because this is one of the more versatile parts of this whole build. And this is what I decided to do with it, is I put this 1 inch by 1 inch bar that I made out of white oak across, and I'm going to store my clamps on it. I've been storing my clamps on the canopies, and I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. But what I did was I put pocket holes in here and attached them to the sides that way, and then I put these spare blocks, they're 1 inch by 1 inch also, the excess that I cut off of this, and I glued them on to the walls to give it a little bit more downward support. And that's going to be how I store my clamps. So that's one. If you want to put shelves in here, you can. You just have to take a measurement and then attach them any way you want. You can do pocket holes, glue, supports like I did with this. Any number of things you can do with it. Again, just don't go by measurements that are in the plan. Make sure you measure it itself and then cut to those dimensions rather than going blindly by the plans. Otherwise, you could wind up cutting them too short and wasting wood. So, yeah, that's one option. So this is how I would hang my clamps before. I would just, these crossbars that come down for the canopies, I would just hang them like that, and I'd have all of them lined up here, and they'd pretty much come to here because I had so many. And yeah, this by far on the side of the miter station is by far a much better option. So evidently I didn't record, or I lost the footage of me attaching the side cabinets on, but basically I just got everything lined up and then drove some screws into it, making sure I lined up with my bridle joint supports. And that's part of what's going to make this thing so strong, is those bridle joint supports, and then everything is screwed into them, holding them in place, and it's super strong. So the next step is to start painting it. I want to paint the base before I move on to the next step, because I don't want to have to pull the drawers out and take them apart to paint them, so and tape everything up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint this, and then I'm going to move on to the drawers. And yes, I know some people aren't going to like these colors, but this is what I chose. It's what I like. You can paint it any color you want. I didn't go super fancy with the paint. I just went to Home Depot and got the Bear marquee and chose my colors and how to mix it up. I went with the marquee because of the one coat coverage, and it really does do one coat coverage, especially on raw wood. The only way I could see it not being a one coat coverage is if you're trying to cover up a dark color with a lighter color. Then you might have to do a base coat or multiple coats, and the typical. And so this is where we're at, and I think it looks really good, and it's turning out really, really well. And so now it's time to get started on the drawers. So obviously the first step is to cut the pieces down to size. And yes, I'm using just the generic pine plywood from Home Depot. And so I'm going to cut them to width, and then I'll get them cut to length. Once I have all the pieces cut, then I'm going to cut the dovetails. I decided to do dovetails on these drawers simply because it's my favorite type of drawer joint. And yeah, using this plywood for dovetails is not the best. You'll see a piece blow out here in just a moment, and with this plywood you have to take your time and do just about everything you can to be able to get a clean cut, but it is possible. And right there you can see the piece that blew out. But like I said, it is possible to get clean cuts with it. Just have to take your time and go really slow. And so once I get all the tails cut, then it's time to cut the pins. And what I'll do is I'll get everything set up in my jig and cut my first set of pins, and then test it and make any adjustments on the pins versus on the tails, and make sure everything's fitting together like I want it to and all that. Cutting the pins is a lot easier with this plywood because you're using a straight bit versus a dovetail bit. But one thing that I found out is with this plywood, it will burn up your bits, especially with how slow you have to go. So yeah, I need to get my bits cleaned and sharpened before I try to use them again after cutting these 9 drawers. So once I have all my dovetails cut, then I want to cut the dados for the drawer, and I'm going in between 2 pins and making sure it lines up so that it hides it fairly well. So the dados are for the bottom of the drawer. So once I get all my dados cut, then I will cut my bottom panels to size, and then I'll do a dry fit before I start gluing everything up, just to make sure everything's lining up and I can make adjustments before I start gluing, which if you try to make adjustments after you start gluing, it can become a real mess and you're just causing yourself a lot more work. It's always better to do a dry fit first. And after that, you take it back apart and glue it up and clamp them up and let them dry. Once the glue is dried, I usually leave them overnight. I'll take them out of the clamps and sand them down to get the dovetails flush and get rid of any glue squeeze out that I couldn't clean up with a rag.
Okay, so because of the way that I built this cabinet, I can't get the camera back in here while I'm installing the slides, be able to show you guys exactly what I'm doing. So I figured I'd just break it down for you real quick, because I don't think I've ever actually gone over with you guys how I install slides. When I have a base to be able to support a spacer on, that's all I'll do is I'll put a spacer in. I've got this piece of 5/8 inch Baltic birch, the scrap piece I had laying around. I cut it, just cut it down a strip, and then I cut it to the length to where I want my slides to sit. So I've got a face that's going to be going on here. So I want it that far back, and then another 1/16 of an inch back behind that. So I cut it to the length, so that way I just push it up against the back, and that way I can just, when I go to put my slide in, I can just put it flush with the front and then drill my holes and screws. So the idea here is I'm going to take the slide, I'm going to slide it in here, but I'm not going to push it all the way back. Instead, I'm going to bring it to the front. I'm going to bring it to the front like that, and I'm going to flush it. And then from there, I will drill a hole here using a self-centering bit, a VIX bit, VIX, and put a screw in there. And then I'll do the same thing in the back there in one of those holes. I usually try to use the center holes. Once I have those 2 set, then I'll put 3 more screws for this one. 1, 2, and 3. And then I'll put the drawer on, and I'll show you that when I get to that part.
So yeah, first thing I want to do is I want to install the cabinet part of the drawer slide, and I do it exactly like I just explained. So then I want to get the drawers installed, so I'll reinstall the drawer part of the slide, and then I'll slide the drawer into place. Now it's okay for the drawers to be slightly narrower than the opening for the drawer, but this is a bit much. I made these drawers a little too narrow, and I'm not sure exactly what went wrong, because I measured 42 times and before I actually cut them to length and then started cutting the dovetails. So I had to do a little shim work to get them to fit right, but eventually I did get them to fit, and it works out great. So what I do is I put the drawer in place, then I move the slides where I want them on the drawer, so basically flush with the front in this setup, and I'll pull them out straight out, and then I will drive the first screw in, then I'll pull them out a little bit more and drive the second screw in, and then I'll pull the drawer completely out and put the remaining screws in from there. Then I reinstall the drawer and test the fit. Okay, so before I get the drawer faces cut and get them ready to go, I am going to actually make the drawer pulls. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the long pieces out. So I've got my blade set at about a 20-degree angle, I don't remember exactly what, and I'll make one pass, then I'll flip the board over and make another pass, and that way I get the exact same angle going opposing directions on both ends of the drawer pull. Once I have all those cut, then I'm going to cut the pieces for the sides, and I've got my miter saw set up at about the same angle that I had as on my table saw, and I'm just cutting the pieces, and you can see I cut off one edge at the angle, then I flip the board and move it and cut the other edge, and I'm using stop blocks or spacer blocks on the back of my fence of my miter saw so that I can get the exact same size, and I've got little marks on there where I line the board up with and I make the cut, and this is definitely the safest way to do it and make quick work of it. Now that I have all the pieces cut, I'm going to glue it up, and basically I'm going to take the long piece and glue it to the two side pieces and let it sit overnight, and then I will sand it down. I cut the pieces oversized just so I could use the sander to get them to the exact shape that I want. I just didn't use the table saw and the miter saw to get them close. So I had some scrap white oak 3/4 inch plywood laying around that I decided I would just use to make the drawer fronts. So once I have all the pulls glued up, then I'll get started working on the drawer fronts, and first I'm going to cut them to width, then I'll cut them to length. Now that the glue is set on the drawer pulls, then I can sand them down. I'm just using my sander to sand them to the right shape and get them flush and get all the excess glue off. So now I want to get the holes drilled for how I'm going to attach the pulls to the face, and I laid everything out and got everything centered and made some marks, and then I just drilled a hole straight through. I've got a piece of scrap underneath so I could drill all the way through and not drill into my bench. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to attach the face and drive 2 screws into it so I can mark on the front of the drawer where the 2 screws are going to go, and then I'm going to attach the handles just so I can make sure everything's lining up properly before I move forward. So I take a piece of double-sided turner's tape and a couple pieces and place on there, and then that'll hold the face in place long enough for me to get the 2 screws driven in, and then I can go from there. So I take the 2 screws out, and then I place the pull where I want it and run the 2 screws in from the inside into the pull, and that sets it in place, and I can check and make sure everything's lining up properly. With all of them done, I can get it ready for paint. And then paint. And I decided to paint the faces black, and I'll paint the drawer pulls yellow. And while I'm painting, Kat is in one of her happy places out there in the garden planting different plants. I think she's planting squash right there. Actually, those are peppers. Hot peppers. So once the paint is dry, then I can get the faces and the drawer pulls permanently put into place. So yes, I've already started using the drawers. That's how badly I needed to store extra storage space. So basically, I'm going to empty the drawers a little bit, and then I'm going to put them back in place where I had them at before, and then I'm going to drive some more cabinet screws into the faces to hold them permanently in place. So I think this is a good place to stop for this video. The next video we'll get started on the torsion box style top, and we'll get the miter saw put into place and get the fence installed and hopefully get it finished up. So until next time, guys, happy creating.